Hello and welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones and we are so glad to have you here today. We are nearly halfway through 2023 and there's a lot happening in Trenton and across the state in the next 6 months because every seat in the state Senate and Assembly is up in November. Plus we've got primaries this summer. Standing by for the Republican take on what to expect for the upcoming election season is author and entrepreneur Elizabeth Nader. She has her hand on the pulse of the state's GOP. First, though, former state legislator and Democratic candidate for governor John Wisniewski is here to break down the Democrats' plan and what we can expect to hear. It's good to see you, John.
Good to be back. Good to see you as well.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, it's hard to believe. Primaries are upon us, and then before you know it, it's going to be another election year. Although some say New Jersey should be nicknamed the election state because there's always an election. Let's get the view from up above. What you think heading into the primaries for the Democrats?
On a state level, the map favors Democrats. I expect at the end of the counting on election night this November, the Democrats will continue to control both the General Assembly and the state Senate. There's a lot of claims by Republicans that the new map favors them. I'm not sure what they're looking at. Obviously, some districts have had their Democratic populations reallocated, and there are some tighter districts, but it's still a Democratic map, and I think that when's all said and done, the Democrats will have a nice majority in both houses.
Do we have many Democrats, incumbents who are retiring, not coming back? Can you talk a little bit about, maybe races that are going to be more competitive or any open seats?
All eyes in the state in terms of primary races for the Democrats are going to be on the race between former Governor Dick Cody and Senator Nia Gill. The redistricting has placed them both in the same legislative district. And unlike what happened in North Bergen, where Senator Sacco decided he would rather just stay as mayor and not challenge for that Senate seat, in this race, both senators have said that they're going to fight to the end. So that's going to be where almost all eyes are on primary night for New Jersey Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, because both of them have been around for a long time. Dick Cody, former governor. How do you handicap that particular race?
Well, I think that Nia Gill has been moved into territory that is less familiar to her. I mean, she's a statewide name, no doubt, because of her long tenure in the state Senate and her championing many progressive issues. And so she will be able to rely on that base of support. But as you correctly pointed out, Dick Cody is the former governor, long time. I think he's the longest serving legislator in New Jersey's history. He's been, I think, almost 40 years, if not 40 years, in the legislature. And so he brings an impressive resume. In addition, he brings lots of fundraising skills. When he was Senate president, when he was acting governor, Dick Cody certainly developed a reputation and a following that will serve him well in this primary. But I think it's too early to say exactly how that'll turn out.
Yeah. Now, in New Jersey, it is an overwhelming blue state.
Yes.
But the pendulum at the governor's office, goes back and forth because we have had Republican governors, Chris Christie, Christie Whitman. But, how do you see it breaking down at the legislative level? Because Republicans are saying, hey, listen, we're in striking distance. We can. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think that more than ever, they can legitimately say they're in striking distance. But the question that's never really addressed is, what is that distance? In my opinion, it's, a football field or longer away. I mean, they've got to throw a 110-yard pass to get over the goal line here. And I just don't see that being possible. As I said, the map has changed and in some ways made some very safe, robust Democratic districts a little less safe, but still overwhelmingly Democratic. And so I think obviously for their purposes, they've got to talk up the game. They've got to say they've got a shot. Otherwise, who's going to contribute to their races? But when all is said and done, it is still, as you pointed out, an overwhelmingly Democratic state. And these races, they're not statewide races. When you run in the 19th district, as I did for 22 years, it's about the 19th district. It's not about Mahwah. It's not about Cape May. It's not about Camden. It's not about Newark. It's about that district. And you can replicate that 40 times, and each one of these races will be decided on exactly what's happening in that district and who those personalities are.
Yeah. So when you're in power, you also, well, you have the power, but you also get blamed. And we are at really high inflation. New Jersey has always been a very expensive state to live in, and combine that, cost of living is always an issue. Are those going to be the issues that we hear the most about, or
Well,
is
I
it going
think
to
you
get
will.
hyper fixated on really super local issues?
Well, I think that if you're running a statewide, I mean, look, there's only so many dollars you can raise and spend. And so there are some broader thematics that each party brings to bear in each legislative district because it makes running campaigns a lot simpler and a lot more affordable. And so the Republicans have always trotted out, the boogeyman of waste, fraud, and abuse, and they're going to make government more efficient. In the times that they've had the ability to do that, they've made it less efficient and more prone to waste and fraud. The reality is New Jersey is an expensive jurisdiction, right? There's the property taxes are high, insurance is high, salaries are high, wages are high, and so that makes it a very expensive state. Now, if arguing that New Jersey is an expensive place to live is a recipe for success for Republicans, then they would have had the majority already, but they don't. And that's because while they can argue that, and to their base, that's a very resounding argument to most of the unaffiliated voters who decide elections. They get it. There's nothing to blame Democrats because of New Jersey's geographic proximity between Philadelphia and New York.
All politics is local, but I can't help but talk about, now that we know Joe Biden is going to run for a second term as president, there had been a lot of talk. Is Phil Murphy going to run? Is he not going to run? And he hasn't said one way or another if he's going to run for president, but he has said if Joe Biden runs, he's going to have my support. So what can you say? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that makes sense. Look, everybody who gets sworn in to the office of governor, within a week or two, they start, humming "Hail to the Chief" because it is a very powerful position, and people naturally start ascribing national ambitions to the New Jersey governor. And so no one should be surprised that Phil Murphy was toying with the idea, should Joe Biden not run, should something change in the dynamic of the Democratic Party, he wanted to be perceived as somebody that could be a go-to, ready-to-run candidate. But there's no advantage for any Democrat nationally challenging a sitting president, especially facing what is being faced on the Republican side. It does look like it's going to be a matchup, a redo between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump. And I think in that race, Joe Biden has the decisive advantage.
So where does that leave Phil Murphy? He is. You can only occupy the governor's office for 2 terms. What does this do with it? What happens to him now? Because a lot, like you said, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I don't think anybody should count out Phil Murphy. In a second Joe Biden administration, there's going to be a need for cabinet officers. Most of those cabinet officers that are there now will want to move on for the benefit of their families and their own personal finances to get private sector jobs. And so the Biden administration will be looking for, Fed chairmen and finance, treasury secretaries and secretaries of state, and, the list goes on. And so there's always that possibility. And every governor who comes off their second term and is looking for that next thing sets themselves up either to be in someone's cabinet or to be a commentator, as we've seen one recent former governor spending a lot of time with George Stephanopoulos. And so I think that there are lots of opportunities for Phil Murphy post his gubernatorial term. It remains to be seen exactly how that plays out.
Do you think Chris Christie is going to jump in on the Republican side?
Oh, I think he can't wait to jump in, and he sees some type of opening. But as was pointed out to him in a recent forum in, I think it was New Hampshire, he's got a really delicate dance to do here, because while he is basing his campaign that Donald Trump would be a disaster for the Republican Party, he's the guy that was the first to endorse Donald Trump when he backed out of the primary.
You know, now that we know Joe Biden is running for a second term, even though it's a year and a half off, and we have our own election in New Jersey, are they paying as close of attention to the local races, or is the national still sucking all the air out of some of those local races?
Well, having run for 22 years, 11 terms for the legislature, very often the legislature is running at the low part of the election cycle, the lowest turnout, the least interest. And that's unfortunately where we are right now in New Jersey. More people are really focused on what's going to come federally than they are on what's happening in New Jersey. And that's a mistake, because so much of what's important to them happens on a state level.
Right, and New Jersey has elections. Elections are on the odd years, so there's not another gubernatorial race until 2025. So 2023, the top of the ticket is the Senate and Assembly. And a lot of times, if you do, as a reporter, doing your man on the street interviews, people don't always know who their local representatives are.
If you walk through the district and say, who's your assemblyman, who's your senator, most people won't know.
We thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today, to break down a little bit about what to expect in New Jersey, and also taking a look at what's happening at the national scene and how it always comes back to New Jersey. There are always New Jersey ties to it.
New Jersey is the center of the universe.
It is. It feels like it anyway. All right, John Wisniewski, thank you so much. Good to see you.
Laura, good to see you.
Elizabeth Nader is an author and entrepreneur, and she has her hand on the pulse of the state's GOP. Let's first of all, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you, Laura. I don't know if I have my hand on the pulse. I feel like I'm swimming in the pulse. I don't know. But thank you for inviting me on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's talk about, in New Jersey, it's always about what's happening next, the next election, the race for governor in New Jersey. Now, it feels like it's kind of early, but candidates are already getting ready. So can you talk about what the talk is amongst the Republicans? Are we going to see a large field of candidates?
I don't know how large the field will be. I think to talk about the upcoming gubernatorial race, I think I want to just mention the last one a little bit from this standpoint. We had a missed opportunity. And I think that's a cautionary tale that anyone who's going to run this year needs to pay attention to. If you compare Jack Ciattarelli to Governor Youngkin, who won in Virginia, and you compare those races, Youngkin ran on social conservative issues. He ran on the parental rights issue. He ran on what really people cared about across the spectrum. It didn't matter if you were a D, an R, or independent. But when we look at the Ciattarelli campaign, you saw a lot of running, sort of like I said, it was like a 1990s campaign. That's what it felt like to me, running on taxes, running on all the things that in New Jersey, we know are issues, but it didn't capture the hearts and minds of people. So I would first say to anyone looking to run, and we'll talk about, how that field is shaping up, you need to pay attention to what people care about, no matter their party affiliation. And Laura, I got to tell you, parental rights and social conservative issues and all the things that really the pandemic highlighted, these are still with us and very, very much a way to reach the people. So that's the first thing I want to say. But yeah, the field is shaping up. I mean, we've seen the announcements from on the Democrat side. No real formal announcements yet on the Republican side. I think Jack in his concession speech sort of said, I'm running again, although I'm not totally clear whether or not, I think most of us believe that's the case. So we're still waiting to see who on the Republican side. I have some ideas if you want to hear them.
Right. Well, I would love to hear them. First, though, you touched on something about learning from the last election, because a lot of people thought, a lot of pundits thought Phil Murphy is going to walk away double digits. It's going to be a landslide. It wasn't. Jack Ciattarelli almost won. And then you had some areas where there were legislative districts, where you had South Jersey, where Steve Sweeney, the Senate president, longtime Democrat, was ousted by somebody no one had heard of before, Ed Durst, down in South Jersey. So what are we learning from that, and what are Republicans, getting in their playbook, shall we say?
Well, a few things from that. First of all, Sweeney was very much in the crosshairs of the grassroots movement in New Jersey that came out of the 2019, early 2020 parental rights fight, when Steve Sweeney was really leading the way to take away the religious exemption for vaccines. And it caused this furor of medical freedom to suddenly get involved. Thousands of parents that got involved, and they really had their sights on him. We don't know how the Durr phenomena, how can we repeat that necessarily? But it's really something that was quite fascinating. And yeah, I mean, we all celebrate his win. To take out someone like Steve Sweeney when you're on the conservative side was pretty amazing. And yes, the overall race was close, but we don't celebrate close. I'm sort of tired of celebrating close. I want to celebrate win. But when we look at, I really think, the pain that we went through as a state in Jersey as a result of Murphy's policies, his handling of the pandemic. A third of the businesses closed, never to reopen. Over 8,000 seniors died in the nursing homes. One thing after another, the schools and the kids that lost the learning loss and staying out of school. When we look at that anger and frustration, it really should have resulted in a win for us at the highest point of the ticket. It didn't. I understand it was close, but let's talk about the real story down ballot, because that's where we saw, not only did Senator Durr win, but let's go even deeper. We won hundreds of school board races. And when I say we, I'm talking about really the conservatives part of the party, people that are registered Republicans, winning a race that's supposed to be nonpartisan, right? But bringing the conservative ideals. We won a ton of mayoral races, a ton of city council races. So there's a story here, Laura, and in the last two elections, we've seen that repeated. So while the top of the ticket wasn't there for us, I think the energy, and when they say politics is local, the energy has built on the local level, and that's the lesson that we have to learn.
And now there are more registered Democrats than there are Republicans in the state, but that biggest pool is the undeclared, the independent voters. And at the local level is where you're really seeing how people are feeling and really voting.
Well, I also think, I'm glad you bring that up, because I also feel like when we look at it from a numbers standpoint, you say there, let's say 2.5 million registered Democrats, equal number of registered independents, and 1 million less at least registered Republicans. So when you look at that and you say, how do you appeal even statewide to that kind of audience? There's this idea that you need to run to the middle. And I always say, I don't really think there's a middle. I mean, the assumption that independents are in the middle, what does that mean? And are they really? Or is it just that they don't identify with a Democrat or Republican and Jersey, sort of Jersey attitude, I'm going to be independent? But most of them, a huge majority of them, care about these social issues, social conservative issues in most cases. So if I'm a Republican and I'm looking to appeal to independents, which we have to do to win, I need to really be more of a common sense, common ground, sort of populist type Republican. The independents look at me and say, hey, that person understands what I'm going through, my family, my small business. They understand how hard it is to live in this state from an affordability standpoint. And I like that person. So we have to find a way to appeal to them, not because they're in the middle, but because the issues that they deal with every day are the issues that we're fighting for.
All right, so let's get into it of who you think the potential Republican candidates could be. First, I guess the most obvious, what do you think about Jack Ciattarelli? You said in his speech, indicated maybe.
Yeah, I think probably more than maybe. I heard it like yes, and he's still, of course, going across the state, and most people refer to him as the sort of presumed nominee. I do think we need to look at this objectively. This will be his third run for governor. Be reminded, he ran in the primary against Kim Godano and lost, and then, of course, ran in 21. So this will be his third run. Now, anyone who runs for a major office like that 3 times, I would take caution with that and say, is that our best foot forward? So that's one note to take. But there's also been such a change in the state. And I really believe that it's time for a different voice. Now, what could that voice be? When I look at the potential field, I look at people like John Bramnick or Holly Schapese, and I see them more on the left side of the party. So you would maybe term them a little more moderate. I think their appeal is more probably in a general and less so in a primary, because in a primary, you need to win the tried and true Republicans. You need to win the base. And when we look at the conservative side, there's a potential for a Senator Testa. Now, he's from the South. He's not as known in the North, but there's been some talk of him as a potential. And then, of course, we've heard a lot about Bill Spadea. Now, full disclosure, I work with Bill Spadea on Common Sense Club, his organization. So I've had a lot of time to see insight into his approach and his personality. He's a conservative. He would be more of your populist, and happens to have a great appeal to independents. And we've seen that through his radio audience. Bill Spadea is the leading radio talk show host in the morning on 101.5 Drive Time. So there's a lot we know about who listens to him. So I think what's interesting there, Laura, is that you have a lot of potential candidates who are, obviously long-term party people who have been in office. And then you have someone potentially like a Bill Spadea, if he decides to run, who brings an entirely different approach. I think that would be an incredible primary.
The cost of living is often the big issue you hear about in New Jersey, but earlier in the conversation, I heard you alluding to what's happening at our schools, and that could be a very big conversation that we have, but every school district is very individual. So what issues do you think we will be hearing about?
So I think what happened, Laura, during the pandemic was just an overreach by Trenton and by the governor into our school districts. And in June of 2020, the state school board pushed forward a very aggressive sexual curriculum and put that down on all of the school districts and said, you must teach this. And it's just flying in the face of what Americans are used to, which is called home rule, which is where we had more power in our local government and local school districts to decide what was right for us. And in general, I think this over control and overreach into kitchen table issues, where these are things that parents normally decide for their children. And suddenly Trenton is sitting there in your kitchen telling you what you're going to teach your kids. And so, yes, affordability is always an issue. And that's a whole conversation we need to fix. But now we've got a government who's reaching into our homes, really, and telling us how our kids will be taught. So people intuitively, I think Americans intuitively, at some point push back against that enormous amount of control. It's just something that since the beginning of our country, frankly, people react when you try to control them too much. They say, no, enough. So this issue is still important. We don't have the solutions that we need. Parents are frustrated. People feel as though government is continuing to grow and tell them how to do things like, raise their children. And it's just gone too far. So I don't think we're past this yet. In fact, I've often said that parental rights is the issue of the decade.
And in New Jersey in particular, we are a home rule state. One of the reasons we do cost that is so expensive to live is because each town has its own school district. There are very few regionalized. I live in a regionalized district. There are very, very few of those districts. And one of the beauties is, so you can make the decision if you choose a certain curriculum. It's being done at the local level. So it definitely conflicts. Some of the policy seems to be in conflict with that home rule that New Jersey loves.
That New Jersey loves and that New Jersey's used to. And we have to pay attention to that. You're so right. If you don't like where you're living, you pick up and you move to a different school district. And we don't have school choice. Hey, that's a whole nother aspect, right? We really don't have that. I mean, we have some charter schools and we have the ability to send your kids maybe to a different public school, but school choice doesn't exist in New Jersey. So it's about moving, and it's about being in a town that you're okay with the property taxes. Listen, my town is right next to another town that has the lowest property taxes in the state almost. I mean, incredibly. But you just drive 1 mile and it triples, right? So Jersey has always had that. We have a ton of smaller towns. It's just not in our nature to be controlled from a central place. And so people don't want it.
Yeah. All right. As we're about ready to close out, just final thoughts. New Jersey, again, it tends to be more blue as far as the number of elected officials, but this pendulum swings back and forth. Are you feeling that 2023 in the legislature and 2025 are going to be good years for Republicans?
So for 2023, all 120 seats are up, as we know, in the Senate and the Assembly. We are, only down by 5 in the Senate and 7 in the Assembly. I don't think you'll see a majority in the Assembly. I think that's a harder hill for us to climb. I do think we have a little bit of a shot of it in the Senate. It's somewhat dependent on what we see in the primaries. A lot of this is whether or not we have good candidates. Again, it's going to be a fight. I am tending to look down ballot more for those victories. I do believe, though, the pendulum is swinging. And Laura, I don't think we're as blue as everyone says. I really don't. I don't think that the blueness that the rest of the country looks at with us is reflective of who we are as a people. So I have some hope in 23 for certain races and for a lot for some local races. And as we build towards 25, I have a lot of hope. And I'm pretty certain that you're going to see an entirely new administration coming from a more conservative angle in Trenton. So let's all work for that and hope for that change.
It's never a dull moment in New Jersey. And of course, it's an open election because there is, Bill Murphy cannot run again. So Elizabeth Nader, thank you for taking the time to talk to us, and we hope to have you back on again.
Sounds great, Laura. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. And we thank you for joining us on New Jersey Politics. I'm Laura Jones. We look forward to seeing you back here next time.